For over a decade, I sacrificed everything to help my husband build his family's company. On our anniversary, he announced to his family, "She won't be needed anymore." What happened the next day left them all speechless. I had spent the past 11 years of my life building something I thought was unbreakable. A marriage, a home, and a future with a man I once believed was my greatest love. My sacrifices were not small. I had left behind a promising career, distanced myself from personal ambitions, and dedicated every waking moment to ensuring my husband's dreams flourished. His family's business, which once teetered on the brink of collapse, now stood as an empire I helped build with my own hands. And yet, on the night of our anniversary, in front of a room filled with smiling relatives and toasts of gratitude, my husband raised his glass and announced, "She won't be needed anymore." Before we dive into this powerful story of betrayal and revenge, I want to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're finding these moments of empowerment and transformation inspiring, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us grow this amazing community. Now let's get into it. For a few seconds, the words didn't fully register. There was laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the faint sound of a waiter refilling someone's drink. My hands felt cold as I turned to him, my lips parting to ask what he meant. But before I could utter a single syllable, his mother let out a delighted chuckle, patting my shoulder as if I were a child who had finally outlived her usefulness. "We're so grateful for everything you've done, dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Now that the company is fully stable, we can take it from here." The weight of her words hit me like a freight train. My husband, no, the man I had unknowingly been building a future for, only to be cast aside, nodded in agreement. "You've worked hard, babe. But this was always the plan. You helped us get here and now, well, it's time for you to step back. Step back. As if I had been an extra in my own life. As if the past decade of sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights were nothing more than a temporary contract. I looked around the room expecting someone, anyone, to express shock or protest on my behalf. But all I saw were knowing glances, hidden smirks, and the unmistakable satisfaction of people who had played a long game and won. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been planned all along. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my breathing to stay even. I would not give them the satisfaction of breaking down, not here, not now. "Of course," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. "I understand completely." A triumphant gleam shone in my husband's eyes, my soon-to-be former husband, though he didn't know that yet. He thought I would bow out quietly, disappear like an old employee whose contract had expired. He thought I would leave with nothing. He had no idea what I was capable of. The realization that changed everything. That night, I lay awake in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly, utterly oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I had spent over a decade believing in him, supporting him, and sacrificing for him. And in return, he had discarded me like an outdated business model. But I wasn't just a discarded wife. I was a woman who had spent years managing financial records, overseeing business deals, and ensuring that every decision his family made was a profitable one. I knew their secrets, their weaknesses, and, most importantly, their vulnerabilities. If they thought they could simply erase me from the empire I helped build, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I slipped out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline that gleamed with the success I had helped create. It was ironic, really. I had spent so many years making sure their legacy remained intact, never realizing that one day, that very legacy would be the weapon I wielded against them. As I stood there, an idea began to take shape. Cold, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Revenge wasn't just an option. It was the only course of action. A house of cards ready to fall. Over the next few days I played my part well. I smiled through breakfast, kissed my husband on the cheek before he left for work, and nodded in silent agreement whenever he mentioned his plans for our future. Plans that no longer included me. But beneath the surface, I was gathering every piece of information I needed. The company accounts? I had access to them. The property deeds, the confidential contracts, the hidden liabilities they had worked so hard to conceal? All within my reach. They had made the mistake of underestimating me, assuming that my role had been nothing more than a silent supporter. What they had forgotten was that I was the architect of their success. And now I would be the architect of their downfall. As I sifted through documents late at night, I uncovered something that made my heart pound, not with fear but with the thrill of a discovery that would tip the scales in my favor. Financial discrepancies. My husband's family had been skimming money off the books, funneling funds into offshore accounts, and manipulating profits to avoid taxes. The very empire they had so proudly declared stable was in reality one legal audit away from crumbling. I could have stopped there. I could have taken that information, handed it over to the authorities, and watched as their empire collapsed. But that would have been too easy. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to experience the same betrayal I had felt. And so I didn't just plan to expose them. I planned to make them beg. The night before the storm. On the eve of my departure, I arranged a dinner, one final gathering before I stepped back, as they so politely put it. My husband was in high spirits, laughing with his relatives, completely unaware that by the next day, everything he held dear would be gone. I raised my glass, mirroring the very toast he had given me just days ago. To new beginnings, I said, my lips curling into a smile. He grinned, clueless. To new beginnings. I took a slow sip, already tasting the satisfaction of what was to come. Tomorrow they would wake up to a nightmare. Tomorrow they would learn that the woman they had so easily discarded wasn't just walking away. She was taking everything with her. Final thoughts before the storm hits. As I lay in bed that night, my husband's arm draped carelessly over me, I felt no sadness, no regret. Only the steady, burning resolve of a woman who had been pushed too far. They had written me off as an afterthought, a stepping stone on their path to success. By the time the sun rose, they would understand their mistake. And when the dust settled, I would be the only one still standing. I woke up before dawn, my husband's arms still draped over me, his breathing deep and undisturbed. For years, I had found comfort in the steady rhythm of his sleep, believing it was the sound of a man at peace, a man who loved me. Now it was nothing more than the sound of my own foolishness echoing back at me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through the past decade, every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had buried beneath the weight of his ambitions. I had met him in college, back when he was just an eager young man with grand ideas but no direction. He had charm, I'd give him that. But charm alone couldn't turn ideas into reality. It took discipline, strategy, and an unrelenting drive. And that's where I came in. While he was the face of the operation, shaking hands and selling promises, I was the one who made sure those promises could be kept. I built his presentations, crafted his proposals, ran numbers late into the night, and held meetings he was too unprepared to handle. It wasn't just love that kept me by his side. It was belief. I believed in him more than he believed in himself. And when his parents finally handed over control of the struggling family business, I was the one who turned it around. The long hours, the stress, the constant pressure to prove we were worthy of their trust. It all became my burden to bear. I streamlined operations, cut unnecessary costs, and negotiated deals that pulled the company from the brink of financial disaster. I watched as his family went from dismissing me as nothing more than the supportive wife, to treating me as their secret weapon. But even then they never truly accepted me. I wasn't one of them. I didn't come from wealth or connections. I had built my intelligence and resilience through necessity, through hard work, through sleepless nights filled with calculations and strategies. And no matter how much I did for them, I would always be an outsider looking in. I didn't realize how deep that divide was until the night of our anniversary, when my husband stood in front of them all and made it clear I was no longer needed. I sat up in bed, staring at his sleeping form, wondering if he had ever loved me at all. Had I been a partner in his eyes or just a stepping stone? Had he ever seen me as his equal, or had he always known this day would come? The answers didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I got out of bed carefully, moving through the dimly lit room with practiced ease. I had spent years in this house, knowing every creak in the floorboards, every soft spot in the carpet. I walked past the framed wedding photo on the nightstand, the one where we were both smiling, oblivious to the betrayal that awaited me years later. It was almost laughable now. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my emails. In the past few days I had gathered everything I needed: financial reports, legal documents, confidential contracts. Every late-night strategy session, every business decision I had ever made had been carefully stored away. My husband might have thought he was the mastermind, but the real foundation of his empire had always been me. And he had just given me every reason to take it apart. The things I gave up for him. Walking down the hallway, I paused by the door to what was supposed to be our home office. It was where I had spent countless hours building the company alongside him, crafting plans that he would later take credit for. I pushed open the door, stepping inside, the faint scent of ink and old paper filling the space. This room had seen every version of me, the hopeful dreamer, the exhausted wife, the determined strategist. Now it would bear witness to something else entirely. I sat at my desk, staring at the framed certificate that bore my name. Once upon a time, I had been on the path to becoming something great on my own. I had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program, had opportunities that could have shaped my career into something extraordinary. But when my husband told me he needed me more than the world did, I made the choice to stay. And for what? For a man who saw me as disposable? For a family who never respected me? I ran my fingers over the edges of the frame, my chest tightening with a mixture of rage and regret. My past self had been so willing to compromise, to believe that love was enough to justify setting aside her own ambitions. That woman was gone now. I reached for a notepad and began listing everything I had done for the company, every innovation, every strategic shift, every deal that had pushed us to the top. It was staggering to see it all laid out. My name might not have been on the official paperwork, but the evidence was there. I had built an empire and they had given me nothing in return. Not anymore. The first step toward taking it all back. I had always been meticulous, always thinking 3 steps ahead. That night, I went through every document I had access to, cross-referencing financial records, tracking inconsistencies. It didn't take long to uncover more of their secrets. Illegal transactions, hidden accounts, names that shouldn't have been on certain deals. They thought they had covered their tracks, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. No one knew the ins and outs of the company better than I did. They had underestimated the woman they had spent a decade dismissing. As the hours passed, my plan took shape. It wasn't just about exposing them, it was about making sure that when their empire fell, I would be the one standing at the top. By morning I was ready. I walked back into the bedroom, slipping into bed beside my husband, who was still oblivious to the storm coming his way. He stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, and I simply smiled. For years, I had spent my nights making sure his dreams came true. Now I would make sure he lived through my worst nightmare. I closed my eyes, allowing myself one last moment of silence before the storm I was about to unleash. The countdown had begun. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my husband humming in the shower, completely oblivious to the battle lines that had been drawn overnight. His voice carried through the bathroom, cheerful, unbothered, as if he hadn't shattered my world just days ago. He truly believed he had won, that I would quietly step aside, accept my fate, and fade into the background like an old, forgotten investment. How wrong he was. I stared at the ceiling for a few moments, my mind racing through everything I had uncovered the night before. My husband and his family had built their entire success on a carefully crafted illusion, and now that illusion was about to come crashing down. I had spent years being their most valuable asset, their secret weapon, but now I was something else entirely. The greatest threat to everything they held dear. Slipping out of bed, I moved through the house, taking in every detail with fresh eyes. The framed photos on the walls, the expensive furniture, the little luxury items that had appeared over the years. All of it was a direct result of my sacrifices. My hands had built this life, and yet, I had been cast aside as if none of it had ever belonged to me. I wouldn't just walk away. I refused to. My husband stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, running his fingers through his damp hair. "Morning," he said, smiling at me like nothing had changed. Like I wasn't staring at the face of a man who had plotted against me in plain sight. "Morning," I replied smoothly, forcing a soft smile onto my lips. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemy was the one who knew how to stay unseen. My time for confrontation would come, but not yet. He leaned in and kissed my forehead absent-mindedly before heading to the closet. "Big day today," he said casually. "We're having an important board meeting. Might be home late." I raised an eyebrow. That was a lie. There was no board meeting scheduled for today. I would know. I had been the one setting those meetings for years. If he was lying about this, that meant he was meeting with someone he didn't want me to know about. Perhaps finalizing whatever plans he and his family had for my removal from the business. Good. Let him believe he had the upper hand. I watched him get dressed, carefully choosing his tie, adjusting his watch, making sure he looked every bit the powerful businessman. If only those board members knew that the man they trusted was nothing without the woman standing right in front of him. "Don't wait up," he said as he grabbed his keys. "I won't," I replied. And I meant it. The moment he was out the door, I sprang into action. I already had access to everything I needed. Company records, financial transactions, confidential communications. But what I needed now was proof that could bring their empire down in a way that left no room for recovery. I sat at my desk, opening my laptop and began pulling up files. The offshore accounts, the hidden transactions, the fraudulent deals. It was all there, buried under layers of careful deception. They had operated under the assumption that no one would ever look too closely, that no one would question the numbers. But they had never counted on me being their undoing. With a few keystrokes, I secured copies of everything, making sure to store them in places my husband would never think to check. I encrypted files, created backup plans, and ensured that no matter what happened next, I would always be one step ahead. By the time afternoon rolled around, I had what I needed. But I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make sure they knew exactly who was responsible for their downfall. The truth hiding in plain sight. My husband's family always prided themselves on their reputation. They loved the spotlight, the admiration, the respect they received in business circles. But in reality, their entire foundation was built on deception. They had embezzled money from smaller investors. They had used unethical tactics to push competitors out of business. And worst of all, they had ensured that any mistakes they made would be cleaned up by me, the woman they now considered unnecessary. I knew what I had to do. That evening, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that exuded quiet confidence. Not the subdued wife they had come to expect, but the woman I had been before I sacrificed everything for them. I took one last look at my reflection, and for the first time in years I recognized myself again. This was the version of me they had underestimated. I arrived at my husband's office just as the so-called board meeting was ending. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw him standing with his father, deep in conversation with a man I recognized immediately, an attorney. So this was it, the final step in cutting me out. I stepped into the room, the sound of my heels on the floor causing all three men to turn toward me. My husband's expression flickered with surprise before he quickly masked it. "Babe, what are you doing here?" he asked, feigning casualness. I smiled, stepping forward. "I thought I'd come see how the board meeting went." His father shot him a quick glance, sensing something was off. The attorney, however, remained composed, watching me carefully. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. "You might want to take a look at this," I said, my voice calm, measured. My husband hesitated before opening the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. And then I saw it. The precise moment he realized what he was looking at. The color drained from his face. His grip tightened on the pages, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. His father leaned in, reading over his shoulder. "What is this?" he demanded. I tilted my head slightly. "Oh, just a detailed breakdown of every illegal transaction your company has been involved in. Offshore accounts, manipulated profits, hidden liabilities. You know, the usual." My husband slammed the folder shut. "Where did you get this?" His voice was sharp, panicked. I smiled, crossing my arms. "You really thought I spent over a decade working beside you and wouldn't know how to access everything?" The attorney cleared his throat. "I believe we should discuss this privately." "Don't bother," I interrupted. "I've already made arrangements. Copies of this have been sent to the appropriate people. You have until the end of the week before this goes public. Consider it a courtesy." The silence in the room was deafening. My husband's father looked like he had been struck, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form words. My husband, on the other hand, was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. "You wouldn't," he said through gritted teeth. I met his gaze evenly. "I already have." Then, without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving behind the world I had once built for a man who never deserved me. This was only the beginning. As I walked out of the room, I could hear the murmurs of disbelief behind me, but I didn't look back. The cold, calculated decision I had made the moment I stepped into that office was now set into motion. My husband and his family had made one fatal error. They had underestimated me. And now I was going to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about ensuring that their empire, built on lies and deception, came crashing down in a way they could never recover from. But I knew I had to be careful. Revenge, when executed recklessly, could be just as destructive to the avenger as it was to the victim. I needed to plan meticulously, to weave a web that would ensnare them all without a single mistake. The first step was clear. I had to cover my tracks. I couldn't let anyone suspect that I was behind the sudden appearance of incriminating documents. As I made my way back to the house, I felt the weight of the information I had gathered, the offshore accounts, the falsified records, the manipulated contracts. It was a mountain of evidence, enough to bring them to their knees. But it wasn't enough to just expose them. I wanted them to feel the full force of their betrayal, to understand that every move they made in their pursuit of power had consequences. I had spent years playing the role of the supportive wife, always in the background, always quiet, always waiting for the moment when I would finally be acknowledged for the work I had put in. Now that time had come, but I wasn't looking for acknowledgement. I wanted something far more profound: justice. That night, I sat down with a notebook and began outlining my plan. I had to be methodical, precise. No room for error. The key was to strike when they least expected it, to ensure that every move I made left them questioning their every step. I knew they would be watching me, waiting for a misstep, for a sign that I was vulnerable. But I had been careful for too long to make a mistake now. I started with the finances. The company's assets were all tied up in complex transactions, some legal, others not so much. I had the knowledge to unravel it all, to expose the hidden accounts that no one knew existed. But I needed to do more than just reveal the truth. I needed to make them question everything they had worked for. I spent the next few days combing through the data I had collected, crafting a series of anonymous tips that would lead the authorities straight to their door. It wasn't enough to simply send an email. I needed the kind of undeniable proof that would leave them with no choice but to admit their wrongdoings. I contacted a few trusted sources, people who owed me favors, and had them leak the information in such a way that it would appear to come from an insider, someone within their own circle. It was perfect. The authorities would never suspect me. But as I worked, I began to realize something. Revenge, when it's executed with precision, can feel hollow. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply they had betrayed me. They had used me to build their empire, to give them everything they needed to succeed. And for what? To throw me away as if I were nothing more than an afterthought? The anger that had once been a quiet, simmering rage began to burn hotter. I wasn't just planning their downfall anymore. I was savoring it. Every email I sent, every document I tampered with, every move I made was a step toward something far greater than simple revenge. It was a reckoning. But then, just as I thought I was nearing the finish line, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call from my husband. His voice was different, tense, nervous. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I froze. Had he figured it out? I hadn't made any mistakes, but it didn't matter. If he had caught wind of my plan, I needed to act fast. I had no intention of letting him control the narrative any longer. "About what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "About everything," he replied. "I know what you're doing. I know what you've been planning." My heart skipped a beat. Was he bluffing? Had he somehow discovered the trail I had so carefully laid out? I fought to keep my voice steady. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "I know you've been going through the financial records. I know you've been tampering with the company's assets. It's over." I bit back a laugh, my mind racing. So he had caught on. But how? Had he noticed the subtle changes, the discrepancies that I had intentionally left behind? Or had someone tipped him off? "Do you really think you can get away with this?" he demanded. "You're not going to destroy everything we've built. It's not worth it." A cold smile spread across my face. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. He thought I was afraid. He thought I was going to back down. "You're right," I said, my voice as calm as I could manage. "It's not worth it, for you. But for me, it's everything." I hung up the phone before he could respond, a sense of satisfaction flooding through me. The game had changed. I wasn't just trying to tear down their empire anymore. I was forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. The next day I received an unexpected visitor. It was the attorney, the one who had been at the office meeting when I had dropped the bombshell on my husband. He was older, a man who had always carried himself with an air of authority, but now his demeanor was different. There was a nervousness about him, a hesitation in his steps. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice cautious. "I think we need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, my tone steady. "I've been made aware of the documents you've been leaking," he said, not bothering to sugarcoat it. "The family is trying to contain the damage, but I'm here to warn you, there's still time to make this right." I raised an eyebrow. "Make it right?" He nodded, his eyes flickering nervously. "You can stop all of this. You can walk away and none of this will have to go public. The company can survive. Your reputation, your life, it can all go back to normal." I stared at him, considering his words. There was a part of me that wanted to take the offer, wanted to put all of this behind me and start fresh. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew there was no going back. "No," I said, my voice unwavering. "It's too late for that." The attorney's face fell. He understood then. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about power. It was about something much deeper, something he could never understand. I had already won. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The attorney's words echoed in my mind and I couldn't help but smirk. It was clear now that my husband and his family had underestimated me. They thought they could brush me aside, assume I would go quietly into the night. But what they didn't realize was that every step they had taken to push me out of the business, to erase me from their world, had only fueled the fire of my revenge. The stakes were high and I was determined to make them feel the consequences of their actions in a way they would never forget. But it wasn't enough to simply expose their crimes. I wanted them to experience the full extent of the damage they had done, to feel the weight of their betrayal in every corner of their lives. I spent the next few days keeping my distance from everyone, playing the role of the wife who had been cast aside, who had accepted her fate. I watched as my husband went about his day, attending meetings, discussing the future of the company, completely oblivious to the storm I had unleashed. But it was all about to change. The final phase of my plan was set into motion. I had already secured the financial records, the fraudulent documents, the evidence that would bring their empire crashing down. But now I needed to make sure that when it all fell apart they would have no one to turn to. I needed to make sure that every business deal, every contract, every deal they had ever made was exposed, leaving them with nothing. I made sure to send the final anonymous tip to the authorities. This time, it was the critical evidence that would make everything irreversible. I knew the timing had to be perfect. I waited until the night before the scheduled board meeting, when the family would be gathered together to discuss new opportunities, to send the tip. The phone call came shortly after. It was from one of the agents I had contacted. They had already begun their investigation. It was a matter of time before the truth came to light. I could hear the sense of urgency in the agent's voice. He told me that the information I had provided was enough to launch an official inquiry. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. But there was no time for celebration. The game was far from over. I knew the next few hours would be critical. The family would be reeling from the exposure, scrambling to cover up their tracks, trying to salvage whatever they could. I needed to be there, to witness the moment when everything they had worked so hard to build came crashing down. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the power. It was about showing them that I was more than just the woman they had dismissed. I was the architect of their failure. I watched from a distance as the family gathered for their meeting the next morning, each one trying to hold on to their position, to maintain the facade of control. My husband stood at the head of the table, his face pale, his jaw clenched as he addressed the group. He tried to project confidence, but I could see the cracks starting to show. And then the bombshell dropped. The authorities arrived. The look on his face was priceless. He tried to play it off, tried to act like everything was fine, but it was clear that the walls were closing in on him. I could feel the tension in the room as the agents began to present their findings, laying out the evidence piece by piece. Your company has been involved in a series of illegal financial transactions, one of the agents said, his voice steady and authoritative. These transactions involve offshore accounts, falsified records, and deliberate manipulation of the market. We have gathered enough evidence to take legal action. I could see the color drain from my husband's face as the full weight of the situation hit him. His father, ever the stoic figure, seemed to shrink under the pressure. His mother, who had always stood beside him with unwavering loyalty, now looked lost, unsure of what to do. The room was silent, save for the agent's voice, which continued to outline the charges against them. For a moment I almost felt pity for them. Almost. But then the agent turned toward me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "We've gathered a great deal of evidence, and it's thanks to your assistance that we were able to uncover the full extent of the fraud. Your cooperation has been invaluable." I smiled, the satisfaction rising within me like a wave. It was over. They had no escape now. But just as I thought the game was over, my husband did something unexpected. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he pushed it back. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "You don't know what you're talking about. We've done nothing wrong." The agent didn't flinch. "We have all the evidence we need, Mr. Carter. The truth is out there and there's no hiding from it now." But it wasn't just the authorities that were closing in on him. I had one last surprise up my sleeve. I had sent a copy of the evidence to the press. I had leaked the story to a trusted journalist, someone who owed me a favor, and I had made sure it would hit the news the very same day the authorities arrived. The story broke like wildfire, spreading across the internet, television, and social media. The fallout was immediate. The family's reputation was destroyed, their company's stock plummeted, and the world was watching as they crumbled. I could hear the commotion as people scrambled to contain the damage. My husband's attempts to salvage what was left of his dignity were futile. The legal battles, the media frenzy, it was all too much for him to handle. And then the ultimate twist came. As the family tried to regroup, hoping for some miracle to undo the damage, my husband turned toward me, his face filled with rage. "You did this," he hissed. "You ruined everything." I met his gaze evenly. "No, you did this. You ruined everything the moment you decided I was disposable." He recoiled as if struck. The realization of how deeply he had betrayed me hit him with the force of a freight train. But there was no time for regret now. His empire was falling apart and there was no stopping it. The damage was done and I had made sure of it. The satisfaction I had hoped for was bittersweet. I had gotten my revenge, but it had cost me more than I had anticipated. I had torn down everything they held dear, but I had also lost a part of myself in the process. As the dust began to settle and the chaos unfolded around me, I realized that the victory I had won wasn't just about bringing them down. It was about reclaiming my own power. It was about taking control of my life again. I walked out of that room knowing that I had done what needed to be done. The family would never forget this day, and neither would I. I stepped outside the building, my heart pounding with adrenaline, yet there was a strange calmness that had settled over me. The chaos I had set in motion was unfolding behind me, the consequences cascading over my husband, his family, and their empire. The media frenzy, the authorities closing in, the company's stock crashing. It was all happening just as I had planned. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Was this truly the end, or had I just begun a new chapter in my life? The bitter sweetness of victory lingered in the air. There was no joy in watching their downfall, no satisfaction in their misery. It was as if a heavy curtain had fallen over everything that once mattered. I had spent so long crafting this perfect revenge, pouring my pain and anger into every calculated move, yet standing there alone in the aftermath, I felt empty. I hadn't expected this. I had expected closure, retribution that would heal the wounds they had inflicted on me. But instead all I felt was the weight of what I had lost. My marriage, my trust, the life I had built alongside him. It was all gone, replaced by the wreckage of a life I had fought to dismantle. And as I walked away from the ruins of their empire, I realized that the hardest part was not the destruction I had caused, but the quiet that followed it. The silence left behind by their shattered world felt deafening, as if all the noise of the past 10 years had been nothing more than a distraction from the truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't just angry at them, I was angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for not recognizing that I had been trapped in a web of lies I had allowed to spin around me. But now, as the weight of the aftermath settled in, I found myself standing at the crossroads of something new. The decisions I had made, the path I had chosen, had created an opportunity for reinvention. It was as if, in burning their world to the ground, I had cleared the way for my own personal transformation. I didn't need their approval, their recognition, or their validation. I had spent too long living in the shadows, working behind the scenes, making them successful while erasing my own identity. But no more. As the days passed, I began to rebuild. Not just the remnants of my life, but a new foundation, one that was entirely mine. I sought legal counsel to ensure my financial independence, to protect what was rightfully mine. I knew that the battle wasn't over yet. There would be lawsuits, there would be legal repercussions, but I was ready. I was done being a passive observer in my own life. I would stand tall and face whatever came next. But the real turning point came when I received a letter in the mail. It was from my attorney, who had been helping me navigate the aftermath of everything I had set into motion. The letter was unexpected. An invitation to a meeting with someone who had once been an integral part of the family's business. Someone who had left years ago under mysterious circumstances. The name on the letterhead read, Sophia Harris. Sophia had been the company's CFO, a woman who had worked with my husband's family for over a decade before mysteriously disappearing. Her departure had always been a topic of conversation. Whispers about financial discrepancies, legal battles, and a sudden resignation. The letter was short, but the message was clear. She wanted to meet. And after everything that had happened, I knew I had to hear her out. I made the appointment. When I arrived at her office, I was greeted by a woman who appeared every bit the enigma she had been in the years prior. There was a sharpness in her gaze, a knowing look that made me uneasy. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "I know what you've done," she said, her voice steady, betraying no emotion. "And I've been watching, waiting for this moment. I've been waiting for you to take control." Her words hung in the air, but I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I focused on her, trying to gauge her intentions. I was the one who uncovered the first set of irregularities in the financial records years ago, she continued. I tried to expose it, but no one listened. I was forced out, silenced by threats, bribes, and legal battles. "But you," she paused, her lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You've done what I couldn't. You've brought everything to the surface." Her words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about me getting revenge. It wasn't just about me bringing my husband's family down. It was about something bigger. Something that had been brewing long before I ever set my plan in motion. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice lowering. "There are others. People who were silenced, people who knew the truth but couldn't speak. I've spent years gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose them all." A sense of realization washed over me. What I had thought was an isolated act of vengeance was part of something much larger. A web of deceit and corruption that stretched far beyond my husband's family. Sophia's quiet rebellion had been simmering for years, and now it seemed that I had unwittingly become a part of it. "I want to help you," she said, her tone softer now. "You've set the wheels in motion, but there's more to uncover. More people who need to be held accountable. More lives that need to be changed." In that moment, I realized that the revenge I had sought was only the beginning. I hadn't just taken down an empire. I had ignited a movement. Sophia's offer wasn't just about fixing the past, it was about reshaping the future. It was time to let go of the pain, to let go of the anger, and to focus on building something new. A future where I no longer hid in the shadows, where I could finally step into the light. And as I walked out of Sophia's office, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The storm had passed, and now I could begin the work of rebuilding, not just my life but everything that had been taken from me. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready. My boss laughed when I asked for a promotion and said, "Pretty girls don't need career advancement." I quietly gathered my things and left. 2 weeks later, he received an email from the CEO introducing the company's new majority shareholder, me. My family had been silently buying stock for months, waiting for the perfect moment. Pretty girls don't need career advancement. The words hung in the air like poison as Samuel Freeman's laughter echoed off the walls of his corner office. His eyes, cold and dismissive, looked me up and down as if I were merchandise rather than an employee who'd spent 3 years building his company's market share. That moment crystallized everything, the past, present, and what would happen next. But to understand why I quietly gathered my things and walked out that day, you need to know about my grandfather first. My name is Olivia Mitchell, and until 2 weeks ago, I was a senior marketing manager at Freeman Technologies. What Samuel didn't know was that I never needed that promotion. What I needed was for him to show his true colors one last time before I took back what belonged to my family. I was only 7 when I first noticed something was wrong with Grandpa Joe. He'd always been larger than life. the man who built computers in his garage before most people owned one, who spoke about innovation with a fire in his eyes that made you believe anything was possible. But that summer the fire was gone. "Livy," he said, his voice cracking as I climbed onto his lap during a family barbecue, "never trust a man who smiles while looking you in the eye and stabs you in the back." I didn't understand then. How could I? But I remembered how my father exchanged glances with my uncles, how my mother's hand trembled as she passed Grandpa another iced tea. Mitchell Freeman Technologies had been the culmination of my grandfather's life's work. "Equal partners," he told us countless times, his voice growing bitter with each retelling. Samuel and I were supposed to be equal partners. Their company had pioneered affordable home computing in the 80s, growing from a garage operation to a national brand. My grandfather was the technical genius, Samuel the business mind, until the day the partnership agreement was revised. The betrayal unfolded slowly. Legal documents with fine print. Clauses that activated only under specific conditions. A restructuring that gradually diluted my grandfather's ownership while he was busy developing their next breakthrough. By the time he realized what was happening, Samuel owned 95% of the company, and there was nothing legally we could do. I remember visiting Grandpa Joe in his study when I was 12. The once vibrant man who taught me to build circuit boards now spent hours staring at newspaper clippings about Freeman Technologies' success. "He didn't just steal my company, Livy," he whispered. "He stole my legacy." The day we buried him, I stood by his grave long after everyone had left. The rain soaked through my black dress as I made a promise I intended to keep. "I'll get it back, Grandpa. Everything he took from you." The journals appeared a month later. Mom found them while cleaning out his home office. 3 leather-bound books hidden behind a loose panel in his desk. Inside were detailed accounts of the early days of Mitchell Freeman, including the original partnership agreement that promised 50% ownership to each founder and their heirs, with provisions for future generations to have opportunities within the company. "He saved everything," my father said as we spread the documents across our dining room table. Contracts, memos, even handwritten notes from meetings where Samuel had made promises he never intended to keep. My grandfather had documented every step of Samuel's methodical betrayal. That night changed everything for us. What had been a vague family grievance crystallized into a mission. My father, a financial advisor, looked up from the papers, his expression hardening. "Freeman Technologies is publicly traded now. Smaller shareholders than in the past." My mother, always the practical one, was already doing calculations. If we pooled our resources, sold some assets, we could start buying stock, my uncle finished, quietly through different channels. I was 17 then, preparing for college. As my family discussed investment strategies and proxy votes, I made my own decision. "I'm changing my major to business," I announced. "And after I graduate, I'm going to work for him." The silence that fell over the table was heavy. My father was the first to understand. "You want to learn the company from the inside." I nodded. "Grandpa built that company. I want to understand exactly what was stolen from us before we take it back." The next 6 years were focused on a single goal. My business degree, MBA, and strategic internships were all chosen to build the perfect resume. Impressive enough to get hired at Freeman Technologies, but not so outstanding that I'd draw excessive attention. I changed my last name legally to my mother's maiden name, Walker. Samuel had never met my mother or me, but I couldn't risk him making the connection to Mitchell. While I studied, my family executed the first phase of our plan. Small stock purchases spread across different investment accounts and family members, never enough at once to trigger reporting requirements. Patience was our strategy. By the time I graduated with my MBA, we owned nearly 12% of Freeman Technologies. The day I accepted my entry-level position at the company, we celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. My father raised his glass in a toast. "To Joe Mitchell, whose legacy lives on through his granddaughter." My mother squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this, Olivia? It could take years." I thought about my grandfather in his final days, a shell of the brilliant man he'd once been. I thought about the empire Samuel had built on stolen dreams. "We have time," I replied. "Samuel's not going anywhere, and neither am I until I own his desk." The next morning, I walked into Freeman Technologies headquarters for the first time, carrying my grandfather's watch in my pocket like a talisman. Looking up at the gleaming glass tower that should have had my family's name alongside Freeman's, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Samuel Freeman had no idea who I was. But he would. Oh, he would. The security guard handed me a visitor badge with a smile. "First day jitters?" he asked, noticing my white-knuckled grip on my portfolio. "That obvious, huh?" I managed a nervous laugh that wasn't entirely fake. Despite my years of preparation, walking into the lion's den felt surreal. My carefully crafted resume sat in my leather portfolio, the one Mom had given me as a graduation gift. I'd strategically built my credentials to be impressive enough to get through HR screening but not so outstanding that I'd attract executive attention. B+ average from a respectable but not elite business school. Solid internships at mid-tier companies. Good recommendations, but not glowing enough to make me a rising star. I needed to be forgettable enough to blend in, competent enough to advance gradually. The elevator climbed to the 14th floor, marketing department. My interview was with a middle manager named Karen Walsh. As the doors opened, I took a deep breath and stepped into what had once been part of my family's dream. Olivia Walker? Karen emerged from her office, extending a manicured hand. She was perhaps 40, with the practiced smile of someone who'd learned to navigate corporate politics. Right on time. I like that. The interview was textbook. Questions about my experience, strengths, weaknesses. I gave answers that were solid but safe. When asked about my 5-year plan, I mentioned hopes of gradually working my way up through marketing, perhaps eventually to team lead. Ambitious enough to show motivation, modest enough not to threaten. "Why Freeman Technologies?" Karen asked, the standard question I'd prepared for most carefully. "Your consumer electronics division is redefining how families interact with technology," I replied, painfully aware of the irony. Those innovations had begun in my grandfather's notebooks. I want to be part of a company that's building the future. 2 days later, I received the offer. Marketing associate. Entry level. The salary was barely enough to cover my apartment rent and student loans, but money wasn't the point. I had my foot in the door. My first weeks were a crash course in humility. Despite my MBA, I was assigned to update spreadsheets, schedule meetings, and fetch coffee. I bit my tongue when junior executives took credit for my analysis. I smiled politely when older men called me sweetheart, and asked if I could take notes in meetings that had nothing to do with my job description. Each night I documented everything. The company's organizational structure. Decision-making patterns. Who held real power versus official titles. I memorized the employee directory, noting connections and alliances. My apartment walls became a hidden command center, charts and notes hidden behind innocuous art prints that I could flip up when family came over. Sunday dinners became our war room. My parents' dining table transformed from a place of casual family meals to the center of our operation once the dishes were cleared. "The Northeast Regional Director is leaving," I reported one evening, 3 months into my employment. "There's talk they might promote internally rather than bringing someone in." Uncle Dave, who'd leveraged his retirement fund to buy shares, studied the company organizational chart we'd created. "That could shuffle middle management. Any chance you could move up?" "Too soon," I replied. "But I've been helping Karen with the quarterly analytics. If I keep exceeding expectations without threatening her position, she might expand my responsibilities." Mom brought out a manila folder with our latest stock acquisition reports. "We're up to 17% now. Your cousin Ryan's investment group made some significant purchases through their fund." "Samuel suspects nothing?" Dad asked, the concern evident in his voice. I shook my head. "I'm nowhere near his radar. He doesn't even recognize junior executives' names, let alone a marketing associate who's been there less than 6 months." The truth was both frustrating and advantageous. Freeman Technologies had over 3,000 employees across 4 offices. Samuel Freeman operated in an executive bubble, surrounded by sycophants who shielded him from the daily operations of the company he'd stolen. By my 6th month, I'd built a small network of allies. Not friends exactly, but colleagues who respected my work ethic and competence. Lisa from accounting, who processed expense reports but also knew every financial detail that crossed her desk. Marcus in IT, who had access to internal communications. Jen, an administrative assistant to the VP of operations, who saw every strategic document that crossed her boss's desk. None of them knew my true identity or purpose. To them, I was just Olivia from marketing, helpful, reliable, and always willing to stay late to help with a project crunch. You wouldn't believe what happened in the executive meeting today, Jen confided over lunch one day. They're considering acquiring TechVision, but Samuel shut down the whole discussion because the CEO is a woman. Said she'd be too emotional during negotiations. I nodded sympathetically while filing the information away. TechVision would have been a smart acquisition. Their patents would complement Freeman's portfolio perfectly. My grandfather would have pushed for it. The toxic culture became more apparent the longer I stayed. I witnessed Samuel's nephew, fresh out of college, promoted to project manager over team members with years of experience. I saw talented women hit glass ceilings, watching men with half their qualifications climb past them. In executive presentations, women's ideas were ignored until a man repeated them. During my annual review, Karen seemed genuinely impressed with my performance. You've exceeded expectations in every category, Olivia. I'm recommending you for a junior analyst position. Thank you, I said, feeling a strange mix of pride and hollowness. The promotion was earned through genuine work, yet everything about my presence there was built on deception. That evening I called an emergency family meeting. We need to accelerate our timetable, I explained, spreading out my latest notes. Samuel's making strategic mistakes. The company's innovative edge is slipping. If we wait too long, what we're fighting for might not be worth having. My father studied the financial projections I'd compiled. We're at 24% ownership now. Another year, maybe less. I can get there, I insisted. I just need to keep climbing without drawing attention. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out my grandfather's watch from its hiding place. The ticking felt like a countdown. For the first time since starting at Freeman, doubt crept in. Was I compromising too much of myself in pursuit of justice? The mask I wore daily was becoming too comfortable. But then I remembered Samuel's casual cruelty, the way his decisions dishonored everything my grandfather had built. I remembered the promise I'd made at a rain-soaked grave site. Tomorrow I would return to Freeman Technologies. I would smile at colleagues who didn't know my name. I would contribute ideas in meetings where my voice barely registered. I would watch and learn and plan. Samuel Freeman still had no idea who I was. But with every passing day I was one step closer to the moment when he would. The quarterly marketing presentation changed everything. Karen had fallen ill the night before, and in a panicked 6 a.m. phone call, she'd asked me to take her place. Just stick to the slides we prepared, she instructed, her voice raspy with fever. Don't try to improvise. I hung up and immediately pulled out the presentation we'd been working on for weeks. The data was solid, but the conclusions were safe, uninspired. This was my chance, risky but potentially worth it. By 9 a.m., I'd completely restructured the analysis, drawing on patterns I'd observed in consumer behavior reports that nobody else had connected. When I walked into the conference room, the marketing VP raised an eyebrow at seeing me instead of Karen, but gestured for me to begin. As you can see, I concluded 15 minutes later, pointing to my final slide, if we redirect 30% of our traditional advertising budget to targeted digital campaigns among the demographics I've highlighted, we could increase conversion rates by an estimated 18% while reducing overall marketing spend. The silence that followed was deafening. The VP leaned forward, removing his glasses. These aren't the projections Karen showed me yesterday. No, sir. I took the liberty of conducting additional analysis overnight. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. The data supported a different approach. 2 more executives peppered me with questions, which I answered with growing confidence. By the end of the meeting, the VP had approved my proposal as a pilot program for the next quarter. When Karen returned, she was initially furious that I deviated from the plan, then begrudgingly impressed when she learned the outcome. Bold move, Walker. Could have backfired spectacularly. Sometimes calculated risks pay off, I replied, thinking not just of the presentation but of our entire operation. The pilot program exceeded even my projections. Suddenly, I was being invited to strategy meetings beyond my pay grade. Senior directors began asking for the Walker analysis on their initiatives. I remained outwardly humble while seizing every opportunity to learn more about Freeman Technologies' operations, vulnerabilities, and untapped potential. My days became increasingly demanding, but the nights were even more intense. I'd return to my apartment after 10-hour workdays and spread financial reports across my kitchen table, studying the company's structure until my eyes burned. I memorized patent applications, market analyses, competitor strategies, information that not even most directors had fully synthesized. I discovered that while Freeman Technologies maintained a strong market position, it was coasting on innovations from years ago, many of which had originated with my grandfather. Samuel had systematically dismantled the R&D teams my grandfather had built, replacing innovation with incremental updates and aggressive marketing. The company's foundation was shakier than its glossy annual reports suggested. Every third Saturday, I'd drive 3 hours to my parents' lake house, the one place we knew was safe from curious colleagues or prying eyes. Uncle Dave had installed signal blockers to prevent electronic surveillance, perhaps an excessive precaution, but we couldn't risk exposure as our plan accelerated. "We've acquired another 7% through Ryan's investment group," Dad reported during one such meeting 18 months into my employment. "That puts us at 31%. The Rodriguez family's hedge fund is willing to sell their 4% stake," Mom added. "But they're asking above market value." "Pay it," I said firmly. Samuel just canceled 3 promising development projects to boost quarterly earnings. The stock will take a hit when the market realizes there's no innovation pipeline. My growing professional success came with personal costs I hadn't anticipated. Old friends stopped calling after too many canceled plans and vague explanations. A promising relationship with a law associate fizzled when I couldn't explain my constant unavailability and secretive phone calls. My apartment remained minimally furnished, unlived in, a place to sleep between workdays rather than a home. Some nights, exhaustion and isolation caught up with me. Staring at my reflection, dark circles under my eyes, tension permanently etched between my brows, I questioned whether justice for my grandfather was worth sacrificing my own life. One particularly low evening, I dialed my cousin Ryan, the only family member who had expressed reservations about our plan. "Liv," he said after I confessed my doubts, "your grandfather wouldn't want you to lose yourself in pursuing this vendetta." "It's not just vengeance," I insisted. "It's about reclaiming what should have been ours, what should have been everyone's. Samuel has corrupted Grandpa's vision. And if you succeed, then what?" I had no answer. For so long the mission had been everything. I'd never considered life after revenge. Despite my private struggles, professionally I continued to shine. When Karen was promoted to senior director, she recommended me to take her place as marketing manager. The promotion came with a team of 6 direct reports, my own office, and access to strategic planning sessions one level below the executive team. On the day I moved into my new office, a silver-haired man paused in my doorway. I recognized Franklin Chin, the company's CFO, one of the few executives who'd been with the company since my grandfather's time, though they'd never been close. "You've made quite an impression," he said, studying me with curiosity. 2 years from associate to department manager is nearly unheard of here. "I'm passionate about the work," I replied carefully. He glanced at the framed analytics award on my wall. "You remind me of someone, one of our founders actually. Joe had that same intensity about getting the details right." My heart stuttered. Had he made the connection? "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should," he nodded. "This company could use more of Joe's spirit. Before you, I thought it had been thoroughly erased." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me shaken. I hadn't expected anyone to see my grandfather in me, to remember him with such apparent respect. It complicated the narrative I'd constructed of a company that had completely forsaken its co-founder. That evening, I stood at my apartment window, looking toward the gleaming Freeman Technologies tower downtown. I was no longer an invisible cog in the machine. With each promotion, my actions affected more people. Employees who trusted me, clients who believed in my strategies. The moral complexity of my mission was growing alongside my influence. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine not just taking control of the company, but what I might do with that power once I had it. Would I dismantle what Samuel had built out of spite? Or could I honor my grandfather by restoring his original vision? Samuel's office was just 2 floors above mine now. Soon I would be ready to request a director position that would place me on the executive team, directly in his path. The final phase of our plan was within reach. I touched my grandfather's watch, still keeping perfect time after all these years. We're almost there, Grandpa, I whispered. I just hope I'll still recognize myself when it's over. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of strategic planning sessions, team development, and carefully orchestrated successes. My marketing department consistently outperformed every other division, with innovations that doubled our customer engagement metrics. The executive floor had taken notice. The opportunity presented itself during the annual leadership conference at Lake Tahoe. I found myself seated next to Franklin Chin at the closing dinner, the CFO who had mentioned my resemblance to my grandfather. Your presentation on digital transformation was the highlight of the conference, he commented, swirling his wine. The board members were impressed. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice measured despite my racing heart. I believe there's still untapped potential in our approach to customer experience. Franklin studied me thoughtfully. The Director of Strategic Marketing position opens next month. Barbara's retiring after 20 years. I've heard the rumors. You should apply, he said simply. I'd endorse your candidacy. The position would place me on the executive leadership team, with direct reporting to Samuel Freeman himself. After 3 years of careful maneuvering, the final door was opening. Back in New York, I spent weeks preparing my application and presentation. The family's stock ownership had reached 47% through various channels. Not quite a majority, but close enough that a few more strategic purchases would tip the balance. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The morning of my interview, Mom called. Are you ready for this, sweetheart? As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, adjusting my perfectly tailored navy suit in the mirror. 3 years of work comes down to today. Your grandfather would be so proud. Her voice caught. Whatever happens in that room, remember that. The executive floor was a different world from the rest of the building. Plush carpeting, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the city. Samuel's assistant, a stern woman in her 50s, led me to the conference room where the selection committee would meet. Franklin nodded encouragingly as I set up my presentation. Beside him sat 2 board members, the VP of Operations and the head of Human Resources. Samuel himself entered last, barely glancing at me as he took his seat at the head of the table. Ms. Walker, he said, checking his watch. You have 15 minutes. I launched into my presentation with calm confidence, outlining my vision for the strategic marketing division, backed by data and case studies I'd meticulously assembled. I highlighted opportunities for innovation that would position Freeman Technologies ahead of emerging competitors. My voice never wavered, even as Samuel checked his phone repeatedly, displaying his indifference. When I finished, the board members asked insightful questions, which I answered with precision. Franklin's expression told me I'd exceeded even his expectations. For a brief moment, I felt genuine pride in my work, separate from my ulterior motives. Well, Samuel finally spoke, leaning back in his chair. That was certainly detailed. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I believe attention to detail is essential in strategic planning. He waved dismissively. The board will deliberate and make their decision next week. However, I'd like a private word with Ms. Walker. The rest of you can go. My pulse quickened as the room emptied. Franklin squeezed my shoulder supportively as he passed, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Samuel. Once we were alone, Samuel studied me with cold calculation. You've made quite the impression on my executive team. 3 years and suddenly everyone's singing your praises. I've worked hard to contribute value to the company, sir. Indeed. He stood, walking to the window. Tell me, Ms. Walker, why do you really want this position? I believe I can help guide the company's future, I answered truthfully, if incompletely. He turned, his expression hardening. Let me be direct. I've reviewed your file. Your performance is undeniable, but this position requires someone who will be fully committed to the role for many years. Someone with gravitas. My record demonstrates my commitment. Your record shows ambition, he interrupted, which is admirable in its place. But executive leadership requires more than clever marketing strategies. My stomach tightened as I recognized the shift in his tone. I'd seen it before when he spoke to other female employees who'd gotten too close to the glass ceiling. Perhaps, he continued, his smile not reaching his eyes, you'd be better suited to heading our social media division. It's still a director title with a modest increase in compensation. The social media division was a corporate backwater, understaffed, underfunded, and largely ignored in strategic planning. It was where careers went to stagnate. May I ask why you feel the strategic marketing position wouldn't be suitable? I kept my voice professional despite the anger building inside me. He chuckled, walking closer. Let's just say it requires a certain presence. Long hours, high-pressure meetings with clients who expect a particular type of authority. My performance metrics exceed those of any other candidate, I stated firmly. That's when it happened. Samuel laughed. Not a genuine laugh of amusement, but the condescending chuckle of a man who believed himself untouchable. He looked me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. Ms. Walker, he said with a dismissive wave, pretty girls don't need career advancement. They need to recognize their natural advantages. Your looks open doors. Why burden yourself with executive responsibilities when you could coast on your appearance for years? The words hung in the air between us, the naked sexism so blatant it momentarily stunned me into silence. In that crystallizing moment, I saw my grandfather's betrayer fully exposed. Not just a thief of legacy, but a small, petty man who'd never deserved what he'd stolen. I also realized something else. We were ready. The family's ownership percentage plus the shares held by allies we'd cultivated over the years would be enough. It was time to end the charade. I understand, I said, gathering my presentation materials with steady hands that belied the fire in my veins. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Freeman. He seemed almost disappointed by my calm acceptance. The social media offer stands. Helen in HR will have the paperwork. That won't be necessary. I headed for the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Freeman. Yes. My grandfather always said character reveals itself under pressure. He was right. I left him looking vaguely confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to place the significance of my words. Back at my office, I methodically packed my personal items into a cardboard box. My team watched in bewilderment as I emptied my desk drawers. Olivia, what happened? Lisa from accounting hovered in my doorway. Everyone thought you had that promotion locked down. Let's just say I received unexpected clarity about my future here, I replied, wrapping my awards in tissue paper. You're not leaving, are you? The genuine distress in her voice gave me pause. I'd made real connections here despite my ulterior motives. It's time for a change, I said, offering a smile that felt surprisingly authentic. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt properly. With my box tucked under my arm, I walked out of Freeman Technologies for what I knew would be the last time as an employee. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and sent the text I'd been waiting 3 years to send. Checkmate in position. Begin final phase. As I crossed the lobby, I caught my reflection in the polished marble walls, head high, shoulders back, my grandfather's determined expression mirrored in my own face. Samuel had made a fatal mistake. He'd shown me exactly who he was, just as I was about to show him exactly who I am. The Mitchell family war room was in full operation by the time I arrived at my parents' lake house that evening. Uncle Dave had set up multiple laptops on the dining table, each displaying different financial dashboards. My cousin Ryan paced near the windows, phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with his investment partners. Mom and Dad huddled with our family attorney, reviewing documents spread across the kitchen island. There she is, Dad announced as I walked in, setting down my overnight bag. Everyone paused, turning to me with expressions ranging from concern to fierce determination. Are you okay, honey? Mom asked, crossing the room to embrace me. Your text was pretty cryptic. I'm fine, I assured her, though the weight of Samuel's condescension still burned. Better than fine, actually. It's time. For the next hour, I recounted my meeting with Samuel in precise detail, watching my family's expressions darken with each demeaning word I repeated. When I reached his pretty girls comment, Uncle Dave slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the laptops jump. That's the same Samuel I remember, he growled. Hasn't changed in 30 years. Our attorney, Grace Chin, Franklin's sister, a connection that had proven invaluable, cleared her throat. With the Westlake Fund's commitment this morning, we now control 49.3% of outstanding shares. Another 2% and we'll have clear majority. What about the Rodriguez family's hedge fund? I asked. They were considering selling their 4% stake. Ryan lowered his phone. They're in. Just got confirmation. But they want assurances about the company's direction post-transition. They'll have them, I promised. This isn't about dismantling what Grandpa built. It's about restoring it. We worked through the night, making final stock purchases through various channels, preparing legal notifications, and scripting the precise sequence of events that would unfold. By dawn, Mitchell family interests officially controlled 53.7% of Freeman Technologies stock, a controlling majority by any measure. Grace drafted a formal letter to CEO William Hastings, notifying him of the change in majority ownership and requesting an emergency board meeting. We've kept Hastings in the dark until now, she explained. He's always been Samuel's man, but he's a pragmatist. He'll follow the power. At 9 a.m. Ryan and I personally delivered the letter to Hastings's office. His assistant tried to turn us away, but the words majority shareholder worked their magic. Within minutes we were seated across from a very confused Sue. This must be some kind of mistake, Hastings sputtered, scanning the documentation. These share acquisitions are all perfectly legal and verified, Grace interjected smoothly. The Mitchell family now holds controlling interest in Freeman Technologies. Mitchell. His eyes widened, darting between our faces. As in, Joseph Mitchell's granddaughter, I confirmed. Co-founder of what was once Mitchell Freeman Technologies. The blood drained from Hastings's face as comprehension dawned. You've been working in marketing for 3 years. Learning the company my grandfather built from the ground up, I nodded. We require a special board meeting tomorrow morning. All members must attend. Samuel won't like this, Hastings muttered, already calculating where his loyalties should now lie. Samuel's preferences are no longer the primary concern of this company, I replied evenly. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Full board attendance is non-negotiable. Walking out of the CEO's office felt surreal. After years of careful planning and silent acquisition, we'd finally shown our hand. There was no going back now. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. News of unusual trading activity in Freeman Technologies stock had already caught the attention of financial analysts, though no one yet understood what was happening. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from confused former colleagues, but I maintained radio silence. Tomorrow would provide all the answers they needed. The boardroom was tense when I arrived the next morning, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with my grandfather's watch prominently displayed on my wrist. Grace and Ryan flanked me as we waited in an adjacent conference room while the board assembled. Through the glass partition I could see the confusion on the directors' faces. Samuel arrived last, striding in with the confidence of a man who still believed he controlled the room. "What's this emergency about, Hastings?" he demanded, taking his seat at the head of the table. "The quarterly numbers look fine." Hastings glanced nervously at the door where I waited. "We have an unexpected development regarding company ownership." Samuel frowned. "What are you talking about?" At Hastings's nod, his assistant opened the door. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the boardroom, followed by Grace and Ryan. A collective gasp rose from several board members. Franklin Chen's eyes widened in understanding, a small smile playing at his lips. "What is the meaning of this?" Samuel barked, half rising from his chair. "Ms. Walker, this is a board meeting. You're no longer employed here." "On the contrary," Grace replied, distributing folders to each board member. "Ms. Mitchell, her actual name, is now the company's majority shareholder, representing the Mitchell family interests which control 53.7% of outstanding shares." "Mitchell?" someone whispered as recognition rippled through the room. I watched Samuel's face as the implications sank in. First confusion, then disbelief, followed by a dawning horror as he truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time. I saw the moment he recognized my grandfather's eyes staring back at him, the family resemblance he'd been too arrogant to notice before. "Impossible," he breathed, hands gripping the table edge. "I assure you it's quite possible, Mr. Freeman," I replied, my voice steady. "As you so helpfully pointed out yesterday, pretty girls don't need career advancement. Sometimes what they need is justice for their family." The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might faint. "You're Joseph's granddaughter," I finished for him. "And as of this morning, the controlling shareholder of what was once his company. The boardroom erupted in confused questions and exclamations. Franklin Chin silenced them with a raised hand. I suggest we allow Ms. Mitchell to explain the situation. All eyes turned to me as I took the seat directly opposite Samuel. The power dynamic between us irrevocably shifted. Gentlemen, ladies, I began, it's time for Freeman Technologies to remember its roots and reclaim its future. The special board meeting adjourned after 2 hours of explanations, legal confirmations, and preliminary restructuring plans. Throughout it all, Samuel sat in stunned silence, his empire crumbling before his eyes. As the directors filed out, many pausing to introduce themselves properly to me, I remained seated. Mr. Freeman, I said when we were finally alone, I believe we have unfinished business to discuss. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a single morning. If you're expecting an apology, I expect nothing from you, I interrupted calmly. But I am offering you the courtesy of a private conversation before the public announcements begin. In my office, he muttered, rising unsteadily. The corner office that should have borne my grandfather's name alongside his was a monument to Samuel's ego. Awards, photos with celebrities and politicians, expensive art that spoke more of wealth than taste. I closed the door behind us and removed a worn leather portfolio from my briefcase. Do you recognize this? His eyes narrowed. Should I? It belonged to my grandfather. I carefully extracted yellowed documents, spreading them across his desk. These are the original partnership agreements. Equal ownership. Equal profit sharing. Equal decision-making authority. Samuel's jaw tightened. Ancient history. The revised agreements were a masterpiece of deception, I finished. Shell subsidiaries, hidden clauses triggered by specific market conditions, gradual dilution of my grandfather's ownership while he focused on product development. You executed it brilliantly. It was perfectly legal, he snapped defensively. Was it? I pulled out another document. Photocopies of handwritten notes in Samuel's own writing, detailing ways to mislead my grandfather about contract terms. These suggest otherwise. The blood drained from his face again. Where did you get those? Grandpa kept everything. He knew what you'd done even if he couldn't prove it legally at the time. I leaned forward. He died believing his legacy was lost. That his children and grandchildren would never benefit from what he built. For the first time, a flicker of shame crossed Samuel's face. He quickly masked it with bravado. What do you want? Money? A settlement? Name your price. I laughed softly. You still don't understand. This was never about money. Then what? He demanded. Justice. Truth. Recognition of what was stolen. I stood, looking around the office that symbolized so much pain for my family. But most importantly, restoration of what my grandfather actually valued. His vision for technology that helped people, created by a company that valued integrity. Samuel's expression hardened. So you'll what? Fire me? Humiliate me publicly? Destroy everything I've built for 40 years? The question caught me off guard. During all our planning, I'd focused on obtaining control, not what I'd do with Samuel afterward. Revenge had been my driving force for so long that I'd never fully considered the moral implications of my next steps. In that moment, looking at this diminished man, I realized I stood at a crossroads. I could destroy him as he had destroyed my grandfather, or I could choose a different path. No, I said finally. I'm not going to destroy you, Samuel. That would make me exactly what you are. Confusion flickered across his face. Then what? You'll resign effective immediately with a fair severance package and your reputation intact. In exchange, you'll acknowledge in private company records the true history of Mitchell Freeman Technologies, including my grandfather's contributions and your creative interpretation of your partnership. And if I refuse? I gathered the incriminating documents. Then the legal team explores every questionable decision you've made over 40 years, with these as a starting point. Your choice. The fight seemed to drain out of him. For a moment, I glimpsed the desperate young man he must have been, brilliant in business but forever in my grandfather's shadow intellectually, choosing deception because he couldn't compete fairly. He was better than me, Samuel said quietly, surprising me. Your grandfather. Always 10 steps ahead technologically. I just wanted some control. So you took it all, I replied, not unkindly. And in doing so you limited what the company could become. Without his innovation you've been treading water for years. He nodded slowly, the admission clearly painful. I'll resign. Your terms. As he drafted his resignation letter, I felt a strange hollowness where my anger had lived for so long. Revenge accomplished wasn't the triumphant feeling I'd imagined. Instead, I felt the weight of responsibility for hundreds of employees and the legacy I'd claimed. The weeks that followed brought sweeping changes. We reinstated the company's original name, Mitchell Freeman Technologies, recognizing both founders' contributions. I appointed Franklin Chin as interim CEO while I learned the operational side of leadership, working closely with him to reshape the company culture. We expanded the R&D department, implementing many of the innovations from my grandfather's journals that Samuel had shelved years ago. We instituted a zero-tolerance policy for workplace discrimination and created clear advancement paths based on merit rather than connections or appearance. Most meaningfully, we established the Joseph Mitchell Foundation for Ethical Innovation, funding scholarships for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds with aptitude in technology. 6 months into our transformation, I found myself standing in my grandfather's old study, now preserved as a small museum in our headquarters. My father joined me, studying a framed photo of Grandpa Joe in his workshop. Do you think he would approve? I asked softly. Of how we did this? Of what we're building now? Dad considered the question carefully. The takeover? Maybe not. Your grandfather believed in creating, not taking. He turned to me with a gentle smile. But what you're doing now? Building something better than what existed before? That's exactly what he lived for. I fingered my grandfather's watch, still keeping perfect time. I spent so long focused on reclaiming what was stolen that I never really thought about what came after revenge. And now I'm building something new, I replied, surprised by the genuine passion in my voice. Something that honors the past but isn't constrained by it. As we walked through the R&D department where engineers were developing affordable medical technology for underserved communities, a project directly from my grandfather's journals, I realized the truth. The most important legacy wasn't the company name or stock ownership. It was the vision for technology that improved lives and a corporate culture built on integrity. Samuel had stolen a company, but he could never steal that vision. In reclaiming one, I had rediscovered the other, and found my own purpose beyond revenge. The company was once again Mitchell Freeman Technologies. But more importantly, it was once again a place my grandfather would have been proud of, and so was I. I sold my house to help my daughter buy hers. She said, "Of course you'll have your own room." But then came the excuses. "This isn't working. Maybe try assisted living." Last week I bought her house from the bank. Now she's the one packing her bags, and I'm deciding who moves in. The check was already in Christina's hands when I realized I'd just signed away 37 years of my life. $243,000. Every cent from selling the house where Adam and I had carved our initials into the basement beam during our first renovation, where we'd measured Christina's height on the kitchen doorframe each birthday, where we'd slow danced in the living room just 3 months before his stroke stole him from me. "Mom, you're amazing," Christina whispered, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the cashier's check. "I can't believe you're doing this for us." I'm Kimberly Matthews, and at 62 I thought I understood sacrifice. I'd sacrificed sleep when Christina had colic, sacrificed my teaching career when Adam's construction business needed bookkeeping, sacrificed my dreams of traveling Europe when Christina needed college tuition. But this felt different. This felt final. The house Adam and I built wasn't just brick and mortar. It was Sunday morning pancakes served on mismatched plates we'd collected from garage sales. It was the squeaky third step that warned us when teenage Christina snuck in past curfew. It was Adam's workshop in the garage, still smelling of sawdust and Old Spice, where he'd crafted the rocking chair that now sat empty in what used to be our bedroom. We built our life from scratch, I'd told the realtor when she suggested staging the house with rental furniture. These walls don't need decoration, they are the decoration. But walls don't hug you when you wake up reaching for a husband who'll never be there again. When Adam passed after that sudden stroke, one moment he was cursing at the football game, the next he was collapsing onto our worn hardwood floor. Christina became my anchor. She was the one who held me as my knees buckled at the funeral, my body shaking so violently I couldn't stand on my own. You'll never be alone, Mom. I promise, she'd whispered into my hair as I sobbed against her shoulder, surrounded by 200 people who somehow made me feel more isolated than ever. Those weren't empty words. 4 months after the funeral, Christina called every evening at 7:30, right when Adam used to come home from job sites. She'd bring groceries without being asked, helped me sort through Adam's clothes, even stayed overnight when the silence became too suffocating. That's why, when she and Ben appeared at my door 6 months later with that familiar excited gleam in her eyes, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Adam's death: purpose. Mom, sit down. I have the most incredible news, Christina had said, practically bouncing as she pulled Ben by the hand into my kitchen. Ben looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but Christina's enthusiasm was infectious. They'd found their dream house. A beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and a backyard perfect for the grandchildren I secretly hoped they'd give me someday. The pictures on Christina's phone showed hardwood floors that gleamed, a kitchen island larger than my entire dining room, and windows that let in enough light to grow a garden. It's perfect, Mom. Absolutely perfect. But... Her voice trailed off and she glanced at Ben. We're short on the down payment, Ben finished, his voice barely above a mumble. 20% down on a $400,000 house is $80,000, I said quietly. Mathematics had always been my strong suit. We have 60, Christina said quickly. We've been saving for 3 years, cutting every corner, but house prices just keep climbing. By the time we save the extra 20,000, this house will be gone, or prices will have jumped again. I watched my daughter's face as she spoke. The way her eyebrows furrowed exactly like Adam's when he was working through a complicated problem, the way she bit her lower lip when she was nervous. She was 34 years old, married for 2 years, and desperate to build the life Adam and I had created. We're family, she said, reaching across my kitchen table to hold my hands that were starting to show age spots Adam used to trace with his thumb. You'll have your own room. Your own space. Always. The guest room upstairs had a bay window that overlooked their future backyard. She'd already planned where I'd put my reading chair, how we'd share morning coffee, how I'd help with dinner and maybe even babysit future grandchildren. Think about it, Ben added, though his tone suggested he hoped I'd decline. You're rattling around in this big house all alone. Wouldn't it be nice to have family around again? That night I sat in Adam's recliner, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together. The grandfather clock he'd restored still chimed every hour. The wedding photos still smiled from their silver frames. But the house felt like a museum to a life that was over. The decision took 3 weeks and countless sleepless nights. I walked through every room, touching walls Adam had painted, floors he'd refinished, fixtures he'd installed with his own hands. The house appraiser valued it at $260,000, enough to cover their down payment and leave me with a small cushion. I'll do it, I told Christina over the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. The closing was surprisingly quick. I signed papers transferring ownership to strangers who promised to love the house as much as we had. I packed 37 years into 2 boxes and 6 garbage bags, keeping only what would fit in Christina's guest room. Moving day arrived with autumn rain that seemed appropriate for endings. As the moving truck pulled away from the curb, I stood in the driveway one last time, memorizing the front porch where Adam had proposed, the maple tree we'd planted for Christina's first birthday, the window of what had been our bedroom. Ready, Mom? Christina asked softly, her hand on my shoulder. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and climbed into her car with my 2 boxes and a heart full of hope for this new chapter. At first, everything felt warm and promising, like the beginning of the fairy tale I'd convinced myself we were writing together. The first morning in my new home, I woke to the sound of cardboard boxes being moved outside my door. Through the thin wall, I heard Christina's voice. We can store the Christmas decorations in Mom's closet. She won't need much space anyway. My closet. The guest room closet that was supposed to be mine had become their overflow storage within 24 hours. The room itself was smaller than I'd remembered from the house tour. 10 by 12 feet with a narrow window that faced the neighbor's fence. The bay window Christina had described during our kitchen table conversation? That was in the master bedroom, their bedroom. My reading chair sat wedged between their exercise bike and a stack of Ben's old college textbooks. Morning, Mom. Christina chirped when I emerged for breakfast, but her smile felt rehearsed. Coffee's fresh. Well, sort of fresh. We made it an hour ago. I poured myself a cup from the dregs at the bottom of the pot. The coffee was bitter, nothing like the smooth blend Adam and I had shared every morning for decades. When I reached for the sugar bowl, Ben cleared his throat. Actually, Kimberly, that's the expensive organic stuff. Maybe use the regular sugar? It's in the cabinet. The regular sugar was stored behind a collection of protein powders on the highest shelf. At 5'4", I needed a step stool to reach it. By the time I managed to sweeten my coffee, they'd finished breakfast and were rushing off to work. Make yourself at home, Christina called over her shoulder, but something in her tone suggested the exact opposite. By the third week, I'd learned the unspoken rules. Don't use the good towels in the hall bathroom. Those were for guests. Actual guests, apparently not mothers who'd sold their homes. Don't sit in Ben's chair during evening TV time, even though no one had mentioned it was his chair until I'd made that mistake twice. Don't open the pantry after 9 p.m. because it squeaks too loudly. The pantry lock appeared on a Tuesday morning while I was trying to find ingredients for pancakes. Adam's favorite recipe that I'd hoped to share with them. Oh, that, Christina said when I asked about the small padlock. We're trying to portion control our snacks. You know how it is, so easy to mindlessly munch. I hadn't been mindlessly munching. I'd eaten one granola bar the night before when dinner had been salmon and quinoa, foods that left me hungry 2 hours later. Ben's joke started small. Careful, Kimberly, you're using a lot of paper towels there. Wow, long shower this morning. Hope we don't run out of hot water. Another load of laundry? You might single-handedly fund the water company. I began timing my showers, counting paper towels, washing my clothes by hand in the sink. The woman who'd once hosted Thanksgiving for 20 people was now rationing her use of dish soap. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in November. I'd spent the day organizing their chaotic junk drawer as a small way to contribute, arranging batteries, rubber bands, and takeout menus into neat compartments. When Christina came home, she stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. Mom, did you go through our stuff? I organized the drawer. It was such a mess and I thought. That's our private space, Ben interrupted, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. We didn't ask you to go through our things. I was trying to help. We don't need that kind of help, Christina said, already shuffling through the drawer, disturbing my careful organization. Please don't touch our personal items. That night, I lay in bed listening to their muffled voices through the wall. Their bedroom shared a wall with mine, and the insulation was apparently more decorative than functional. She's always here, Ben's voice carried clearly. I can't relax in my own house. She doesn't have anywhere else to go, Christina replied, but her tone lacked conviction. That's not our problem. She's a grown woman. She could get her own apartment. With what money? She gave us everything for the down payment. She chose to do that. Nobody forced her. There was a long pause before Christina spoke again, and when she did, the words shattered something inside me I hadn't even realized was still whole. She's lonely, clingy. And the house isn't big enough for 3. My daughter. The child I'd rocked through midnight fevers, driven to soccer practice in 3 different states, supported through her divorce from her first husband. The same daughter who'd promised I'd never be alone. I pressed my face into the pillow to muffle the sound of my crying. The next morning, Christina approached me with a manila folder and an expression I recognized from when she was 7 and had broken my favorite vase. Mom, Ben and I have been talking. Maybe it's time to consider some other living arrangements. She opened the folder to reveal glossy brochures. Sunset Manor Assisted Living featured smiling elderly people in wheelchairs, playing bingo and doing arts and crafts. Golden Years Community showed a dining hall where residents sat at assigned tables like school children. There's a great place just 15 minutes away, Christina continued, her voice artificially bright. They have activities, meal plans, people your own age. You might be happier. I stared at the brochures, these colorful advertisements for the place where families sent parents they no longer wanted to see daily. What about your promise? I asked quietly. Christina's eyes darted everywhere except my face. She examined her manicure, straightened the already straight brochures, adjusted her hair. Ben answered for her. Well, circumstances change, Kimberly. We're young newlyweds trying to start our lives. This arrangement isn't working for anyone. I closed the folder without looking at the remaining brochures. I see. You're not angry, are you? Christina finally met my eyes, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. No, sweetheart. I'm not angry. That afternoon while they were at work, I packed my 2 boxes. The same 2 boxes I'd arrived with, now somehow even lighter. I'd given away more belongings during my stay. Books to their donation bag, sweaters that wouldn't fit in the small closet, photographs that cluttered up the clean aesthetic. I left the assisted living brochures on their kitchen counter with a note. Thank you for opening your home to me. I'll find my own way. The woman who'd given away her home was now being handed brochures with smiling elderly people in wheelchairs, as if happiness could be manufactured in institutional dining halls and scheduled activity periods. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I simply picked up my boxes and walked out the front door of the house my sacrifice had purchased. But as I loaded my boxes into the taxi, I made a promise to myself. One I intended to keep. This story wasn't over yet. The taxi dropped me at Willowbrook Senior Living. Not assisted living, but independent housing for people over 55. I'd found it in the phone book 3 days earlier, circling ads with a red pen while sitting in a diner that served coffee strong enough to strip paint. Room 14B became my world. 12 by 15 feet, furnished with a single bed, a small table, and a chair that had seen better decades. The kitchenette consisted of a mini fridge, microwave, and hot plate. Everything I needed to survive, nothing I needed to live. But the silence here was different. At Christina's house, silence felt heavy with judgment, thick with whispered complaints and unspoken resentment. Here silence simply existed. My elderly neighbors minded their own business behind thin walls, and their indifference felt like kindness after months of walking on eggshells. Mrs. Chin in 14A played Cantonese opera at exactly 3 o'clock each afternoon. Mr. Rodriguez from 14C shuffled past my door every morning at 7:30, his walker squeaking a rhythmic hello. These strangers asked nothing of me, expected nothing from me, and somehow gave me more peace than my own daughter had. I established a routine. Morning coffee while watching the parking lot pigeons fight over breadcrumbs. Afternoon walks to the library where I'd sit for hours, not reading, just existing among books that asked nothing of me but companionship. Evening television with the volume low enough not to disturb neighbors who'd never once complained about my presence. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after I'd settled into my new reality. Plain white envelope, return address from First Federal Bank of Ohio. I almost threw it away, assuming it was another credit card offer targeting seniors on fixed incomes. Instead, I found my name typed on expensive letterhead. Dear Mrs. Matthews, it began, and my heart stuttered. They were writing to me about Christina's house. The house my money had purchased, the house that had become my exile. The language was formal, legal, cold. Non-payment of mortgage obligations. 30 days past due. 60 days past due. Notice of intent to foreclose. Christina and Ben had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. I read the letter twice, then a third time, each word sinking deeper into my consciousness. The house I'd sacrificed everything to help them buy was slipping away from them month by month, payment by payment. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, then stopped. What would I say? I heard you're losing the house? Need help with the mortgage? The same woman who'd been handed assisted living brochures wasn't likely to receive desperate calls for financial rescue. Instead, I walked to the community center and used their computer to research foreclosure laws in Ohio. The rabbit hole of legal websites led me through timelines, procedures, rights of lenders, and responsibilities of borrowers. By closing time, I understood exactly how Christina and Ben's dream was crumbling. Thursday morning brought another letter. This one was addressed to occupants. A generic notice that the property would be auctioned in 45 days if the outstanding balance wasn't resolved. Outstanding balance, $312,847. I stared at that number for 20 minutes. Less than what I'd sold my house for. Significantly less. Friday, I called Margaret Henley, the lawyer who'd handled Adam's estate. Her voice warmed when she heard mine. Kimberly, how are you settling in with Christina? She must be so grateful to have you close. Actually, Margaret, I need to ask you something hypothetical. Of course, dear. What's on your mind? If a house was going into foreclosure and someone wanted to buy it directly from the bank, how would that work? Margaret paused. Well, there are several options. Pre-foreclosure purchase, auction bidding, or post-foreclosure acquisition. Why do you ask? Just curious about the process. Kimberly, this isn't like you to ask hypothetical legal questions. I took a breath. It's Christina's house. They're behind on payments. Oh honey. I'm so sorry. Are you thinking of helping them catch up? I'm thinking of buying it. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Kimberly, that's quite a decision. Have you discussed this with Christina? No. And I don't intend to. Monday morning, I sat in Margaret's office with Adam's pension statements, my savings account records, and a determination that surprised even me. I'd kept Adam's pension untouched since his death, some superstitious belief that spending it would make him more gone than he already was. The outstanding mortgage balance is roughly $313,000, Margaret explained, spreading papers across her mahogany desk. With penalties, fees, and legal costs, probably closer to $320,000. You'd need to move quickly. I have it. You have $320,000? Adam's pension lump sum was $400,000. I never touched it. Plus my savings. Margaret leaned back in her leather chair, studying me with the expression she'd worn when I'd insisted on reading every page of Adam's will. Kimberly, forgive me for asking, but why not simply help Christina and Ben catch up on their payments? Why buy the house outright? I thought about Christina's locked pantry, Ben's jokes about my laundry habits, the assisted living brochures left on their kitchen counter like a hint that had grown into a demand. Because helping them taught me something about family, Margaret. Sometimes love looks like rescue. Sometimes it looks like consequences. She spent the next hour explaining the process. Contact the bank's loss mitigation department. Submit a cash offer. Wait for approval. Close within 30 days. They'll likely accept your offer, Margaret said. Cash buyers are gold to banks trying to avoid foreclosure proceedings. And Christina and Ben? They'll receive notice that the bank has accepted an offer from a third-party buyer. Standard procedure. They won't know it's you until closing. I signed the retainer agreement and walked out of Margaret's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. The bank representative, Mr. Walsh, sounded surprised when I called. You want to purchase the property at 1247 Maple Grove Lane? Yes. Cash offer. Full asking price. Ma'am, I have to ask, are you familiar with the property? I almost laughed. You could say that. Within 3 weeks, the paperwork was complete. I signed my name on documents that transferred ownership of Christina's dream house to me. Not sentiment this time. Not love or sacrifice or hope for family harmony. Purpose. The house was mine again, but everything had changed. I chose Thursday at 10:47 a.m. for a reason. Christina would be home from her morning yoga class, but Ben wouldn't return from his sales calls until afternoon. I wanted to see her face first. The daughter who'd promised I'd never be alone, then handed me brochures for institutional care. My hands didn't shake as I walked up the brick pathway I'd helped pay for. The autumn mums Christina had planted in the flower boxes were already wilting from neglect. The newspaper lay soggy on the front step, 3 days' worth of unread headlines about other people's problems. I rang the doorbell instead of knocking. Somehow knocking felt too familiar, too much like family. Just a minute. Christina's voice called from inside, the same hurried tone she'd used when I lived here, and interrupted her routine by existing. The door swung open and Christina's face cycled through expressions like a broken slideshow. Surprise. Confusion. Guilt. Then something harder, more defensive. Mom? What are you doing here? She looked thinner than when I'd left 6 weeks ago. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her yoga outfit hung loose on her frame. The house behind her was messier than I'd ever seen it. Dishes piled in the sink, mail scattered across the counter, Ben's clothes draped over the furniture I'd once been scolded for sitting on. May I come in? Well, Ben's not here and we're kind of in the middle of. This won't take long. I stepped past her into the foyer, noting how the hardwood floors I'd admired during the house tour now showed scuff marks and needed refinishing. The pristine home they'd been so proud of was showing signs of neglect that matched their financial situation. Christina closed the door with more force than necessary. Mom, if this is about what happened before you left, we can talk, but... I pulled the manila envelope from my purse. Official bank letterhead, legal-sized paper, the kind of documentation that changes lives in 12-point Times New Roman font. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Christina stared at the envelope like it might bite her. What are you talking about? The house is under new ownership as of yesterday. The bank accepted a cash offer to avoid foreclosure proceedings. That's impossible. Christina's voice cracked. We would have been notified. There's a whole process. We have rights. I opened the envelope and removed the eviction notice, holding it so she could read the official seal, the court stamps, the signatures that made everything legally binding. You were notified. Multiple times. 3 months of missed payments according to the bank's records. Christina's face went white as she read. Her lips moved silently, processing words like default and foreclosure and immediate vacation required. Who bought it? She whispered. Someone who understood its true value. The front door slammed open, making both of us jump. Ben stormed in, his face flushed red, still wearing his rumpled sales suit from yesterday. Christina, did you see the notice from the bank? Some vulture swooped in and bought our house right out from under us. He stopped short when he saw me. Kimberly, what are you doing here? Christina held up the eviction notice with trembling hands. Mom brought this. Ben's eyes darted between the legal document and my face, his salesman's brain working to process information that didn't fit his expectations. You brought us an eviction notice? How did you even get? His voice died as understanding dawned. Oh my God. You bought our house. I bought my investment. Your investment? Ben's voice climbed an octave. This is our home. No, I said quietly. This was my home. I paid for it. I furnished the down payment that made your dream possible. You turned it into a place where I wasn't welcome. Christina finally found her voice. How could you do this to us? We're your family. The word hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Family, I repeated. You mean like when you locked the pantry so I couldn't eat your expensive granola bars? Like when you timed my showers and counted my paper towels? Like when you handed me brochures for assisted living because your house wasn't big enough for 3? Ben stepped forward, his salesman's aggression surfacing. You're being vindictive. This is revenge. This is consequences. We can fight this. Ben shouted. We'll get a lawyer. This has to be illegal somehow. I almost smiled. I used a lawyer. Margaret Henley. She handled all the paperwork. Everything's perfectly legal. Cash purchase, clear title, 30-day notice period as required by state law. Christina collapsed onto the couch I'd once been told not to sit on without permission. We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have money for deposits, first month's rent. You had money for yoga classes and organic sugar and expensive coffee, I observed. You had money to refinance this house and pull out equity for vacations and new cars. You just didn't have money for the actual mortgage payments. We made some mistakes, Christina whispered, tears streaming down her face. But we can fix this. We can work something out. You're my mother. Yes, I am. And you're my daughter. The daughter who promised I'd never be alone, then made me feel more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Ben paced the living room like a caged animal. This is insane. You can't just buy someone's house because your feelings got hurt. I didn't buy it because my feelings were hurt. I bought it because you defaulted on the mortgage. The bank was happy to sell to a cash buyer instead of going through lengthy foreclosure proceedings. I walked to the mantel where Christina had displayed the family photos I'd brought from my old house. The ones she'd later suggested I remove because they cluttered the clean aesthetic. They were gone now, replaced by wedding photos and vacation snapshots that didn't include me. You did this to yourselves, I said, turning back to face them both. You turned your home into a cage and pushed out the one person who handed you the keys. Christina's sobs filled the silence. Ben stood frozen, his salesman's confidence finally cracked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I let the legal notice do the talking, its official language more powerful than any emotional argument I could make. 30 days, I repeated, walking toward the door I'd entered with hope and was leaving with justice. The locks will be changed on November 15th. I suggest you make arrangements. That evening I sat in the backyard garden where Adam and I had once planted roses together. The sprinkler system Christina had installed was broken, and the rose bushes were struggling, but they were still alive, still reaching toward the sun despite months of neglect. For the first time in months I slept in peace. The moving truck pulled away from the curb on November 12th, 3 days before the legal deadline. I watched from the bay window in what had been Christina's master bedroom, sipping coffee from a mug that didn't have rules attached to it. They'd left damage. Nail holes in the walls where their oversized art had hung. Scratches on the hardwood floors from furniture dragged without care. A burn mark on the kitchen counter where someone had set a hot pan directly on the granite. The house bore scars from their occupancy, but scars could be healed. I started with paint. Not the sterile beige Christina had chosen, but warm colors that breathed life back into rooms that had felt cold for too long. The living room became sage green, the color of new growth. The kitchen transformed into buttery yellow, bright enough to chase away the shadows of criticism that had lingered there. Each brushstroke felt like reclamation. The family photos came next, the ones Christina had banished to storage boxes in the garage. Adam's smile returned to the mantelpiece. Our wedding picture found its place on the hallway table. The photo of 3-year-old Christina on my shoulders at the county fair went back up in the kitchen, because forgiveness sometimes means remembering who someone used to be before they forgot who they were. The furniture shopping surprised me. I'd lived with other people's choices for so long. First Adam's practical selections, then Christina's designer aspirations, that I'd forgotten what I actually liked. The kitchen table I chose was round, not rectangular. Wood, not glass. Big enough for 4 people, not the massive 8-seater Christina had insisted would make a statement. I bought 2 chairs initially. One for me, one for whoever might need a place to sit and be heard. The bedroom makeover took the longest. I painted the walls lavender, installed bookshelves where Christina's exercise equipment had gathered dust, and positioned a reading chair by the window that overlooked the garden. This room would never again be storage for someone else's overflow. My phone rang constantly during those first weeks. Christina called 12 times the first day alone, her voicemails cycling through anger, disbelief, bargaining, and desperation. Ben left 2 messages, both filled with legal threats he couldn't afford to pursue. I listened to none of them completely. The inspiration for the shelter came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rodriguez, my former neighbor from the retirement community, mentioned during a grocery store encounter that her niece worked for Safe Harbor, a local organization helping women escape domestic violence. They're always looking for temporary housing, she said, studying my face with the shrewd assessment that comes with age. Kimberly, you've got that look of someone who's found her purpose. The application process took 6 weeks. Background checks, home inspections, interviews with social workers who needed to ensure I understood the gravity of opening my doors to women fleeing danger. I passed every requirement, and on January 3rd, Marissa arrived. She was 19, 7 months pregnant, and carried everything she owned in a backpack that had seen better years. Her left eye was still healing from a bruise that had faded to yellow-green, and she flinched when I moved too quickly during introductions. Mrs. Matthews, I want to thank you for this opportunity, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I won't be any trouble. I promise. Marissa, this is your home now. You don't have to promise me anything except that you'll be safe here. She slept 14 hours the first night. When she emerged from what had been Christina's former bedroom, she found me making pancakes. Adam's recipe, the one I'd never gotten to share with my daughter. Those smell incredible, Marissa said, hovering in the kitchen doorway like she needed permission to enter. Adam's secret ingredient was vanilla extract in the batter. He said it made them taste like celebration. We ate breakfast in comfortable silence. 2 women who'd both learned that sometimes starting over means accepting help from strangers who become family. Over the following weeks, I watched Marissa transform. The flinching stopped. Her voice grew stronger. She started community college classes online, studying medical terminology because she wanted to become a nurse's aide. In the evenings, we'd sit at the round kitchen table while she did homework and I worked crossword puzzles. I've never lived anywhere that felt like home, she told me one February evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. Even as a kid, I was always waiting for someone to tell me I didn't belong. You belong here, I said simply. Why? The question came out raw, vulnerable. Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? I thought about Christina's locked pantry, Ben's jokes about my laundry habits, the assisted living brochures that had made me feel like a burden instead of a blessing. Because everyone deserves a place where they're wanted, not just tolerated. Marissa's daughter, Elena, was born on March 15th. I drove them to the hospital, held Marissa's hand during contractions, and became the first person besides medical staff to hold that tiny, perfect baby. Would you be her honorary grandmother? Marissa asked from her hospital bed, tears streaming down her face. I know it's crazy, but you're the closest thing to family I've ever had. I'd be honored. The knock came on a rainy Thursday in April. I opened the door to find Christina, soaking wet, her hair plastered to her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Mom, please. Can we talk? She looked smaller than I remembered, worn down by months of couch surfing and cheap apartment hunting. Behind her, Ben sat in their car, staring straight ahead with the stubborn pride of someone who refused to admit he needed help. I made terrible mistakes, Christina said, her voice breaking. I treated you horribly. I know that. But you're my mother and I need. What do you need, Christina? Forgiveness. Another chance. I don't know. Maybe we could work something out? I could pay rent, help with groceries. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who'd learned to see generosity as weakness and kindness as something to exploit. Love isn't about the room you give someone, I said quietly. It's about the space you make in your heart. Christina's face crumpled. I know I didn't make space for you. But I'm trying to change. I've been going to counseling, working on myself. That's good. Change is important. But this house isn't available for rent. Mom. You chose to see me as a burden instead of a blessing. You handed me brochures for assisted living because I inconvenienced your life. Now you want forgiveness because you need something from me. I didn't hug her. I didn't hate her. I simply closed the door after she left, the same way she'd closed her heart when I'd needed her most. Through the window, I watched their car disappear into the rain, carrying my daughter toward a future she'd have to build without my sacrifice supporting it. Inside, Marissa was feeding Elena in the rocking chair Adam had built 30 years ago, humming a lullaby in Spanish. The house filled with the sounds of new life, second chances, and love that didn't come with conditions. This was what home was supposed to feel like. The transformation began with my reflection in the hallway mirror. 4 months, I'd glimpsed myself in passing. Always rushing, always apologizing for taking up space, always shrinking to fit other people's expectations. But now, standing in my own foyer with morning light streaming through windows I'd chosen to leave uncurtained, I saw someone different. I saw Kimberly Matthews. Not Christina's mother, not Adam's widow, not the woman who'd been handed assisted living brochures. I saw a homeowner. A decision maker. A woman who'd reclaimed her power one legal document at a time. The book club started accidentally. Marissa mentioned struggling with her prenatal reading. Medical journals were dense and she'd never had time to develop a love for books during her chaotic childhood. I offered to read alongside her and somehow word spread through Safe Harbor's network. Would it be okay if my friend Sarah joined us? Marissa asked one Tuesday evening, Elena sleeping peacefully in her car seat beside the couch. She's staying at another shelter, but she loves romance novels. Sarah arrived with 3 other women, all carrying paperback books with worn covers and stories of escape. They were younger than me, their struggles different from mine, but we shared something fundamental. The experience of being underestimated. Mrs. Matthews, Sarah said after our first official meeting, you should start a real book club. For women like us, but also for older ladies who might be lonely. The idea took root like the morning glories I'd planted along the back fence. Slowly at first, then with surprising vigor. Within a month, 12 women gathered in my living room every Thursday evening. Ages ranged from 22 to 78. Some were escaping abusive relationships. Others were widows learning to navigate independence. A few were empty nesters discovering who they were beyond motherhood. Margaret Henley, my lawyer, became a regular after I mentioned the group during a legal consultation about expanding the shelter program. Kimberly, I haven't discussed books with intelligent women since my divorce 10 years ago, she confessed. My ex-husband thought book clubs were frivolous female gatherings. I believed him. Dorothy Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter-in-law from my old retirement community, drove 30 minutes each week because she'd heard about our group through the neighborhood gossip network. My husband died 3 years ago, she told us during her first meeting. Everyone keeps asking when I'm going to move on, but nobody asks what I want to move toward. The cooking classes evolved naturally. Teen mothers from Safe Harbor needed basic life skills. How to plan meals on food stamps, how to make nutritious baby food from scratch, how to turn cheap ingredients into satisfying dinners. I'd learned these skills during the early years with Adam, when his construction business was struggling and every dollar mattered. Miss Kimberly, 16-year-old Jasmine said, carefully measuring flour for bread that would feed her family for 3 days. How do you know all this stuff? I learned it the same way you're learning it now because I had to. The kitchen that had once made me feel like an intruder became a classroom where young women discovered their capability. We made meals together, shared stories, and created recipes for survival that had nothing to do with cooking. You should charge for these classes, suggested Maria, a 17-year-old whose knife skills had improved dramatically since her first week. This is better than any cooking show. The best lessons aren't for sale, I replied, watching her confidently julienne vegetables that would have intimidated her a month earlier. The quote frame happened after a particularly difficult Thursday book club discussion about the color purple. We'd been talking about strength, about the difference between submission and strategy, about how survival sometimes requires silence before it allows for speaking. You remind me of Celie, Dorothy had said. Quiet for so long that people mistake it for weakness, until one day they realize the quiet was just preparation. I found the quote online that weekend, "Don't mistake quiet for weak. Some storms don't make noise, but they change everything." The frame went up in the entryway where everyone entering my home would see it, including me every time I left and returned. The phone calls changed too. Christina's number stopped appearing on my caller ID after that rainy April confrontation. The silence felt different from the loneliness I'd experienced after Adam's death. This silence was chosen, protective, peaceful. But other calls multiplied. Women from book club checking on each other between meetings. Former shelter residents updating me on their progress. Marissa graduated from her medical program. Sarah started her own catering business. Jasmine got accepted to community college with a full scholarship. Mrs. Matthews, I got the apartment. Elena's excited voice bubbled through the phone speaker. She was now 4 years old, calling me from Marissa's new place across town. Mama says you can visit whenever you want. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'll bring cookies next time I come over. The kind with chocolate chips? Is there any other kind worth making? My Tuesday mornings became sacred. I'd sit at the round kitchen table with my tea, loose-leaf Earl Grey, not the generic bags Christina had relegated me to, and plan the week ahead. Which shelter residents needed extra support? What recipes to teach in the next cooking class? Which books to suggest for upcoming discussions? The steam from my mug would catch the morning light streaming through windows that faced the garden where Adam's roses had not only survived but thrived under my renewed care. The kitchen that had once felt like enemy territory now held the comfortable energy of Command Central. You've done something remarkable here, Margaret observed during one of her Thursday visits, gesturing toward the living room full of women debating the merits of historical fiction versus contemporary drama. You've created exactly what you needed when Christina pushed you out. I created what we all needed, I corrected. A place where being enough is actually enough. The doorbell still rang occasionally with unexpected visitors. Neighbors asking to borrow tools, former shelter residents stopping by with their children, women who'd heard about the book club through the intricate network of female communication that spans age, race, and economic boundaries. But never Christina. And increasingly that felt less like loss and more like boundary maintenance. On my 64th birthday, the women from book club surprised me with a cake and a gift. A custom doormat that read, "You are welcome here," in elegant script. "We wanted you to see what we see every time we come to your door," Marissa explained, Elena helping her carry the wrapped doormat to the front step. As I placed it in position, I realized the truth of what I'd built. This wasn't just a house reclaimed or a heart rebuilt. This was a life redesigned by a woman who'd finally learned the difference between being wanted and being needed, between love and obligation, between accommodation and genuine welcome. Every morning now, making tea in my kitchen, choosing who sits at my table, I smile. Not because I'm grateful for scraps, but because I'm satisfied with abundance I created myself. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Kimberly showed up with those eviction papers and Christina realized she'd lost the house her mother paid for. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Subscribe for more incredible revenge stories and hit that notification bell.